My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, painful rhythm. This couldn't be right. I was dead. I'd died in that sterile hospital room. The machines beeping their final, flat note as my husband, Alexander Hawthorne, held my hand. His grip had been surprisingly warm, his single unmarred eye, the one not hidden by the grotesque, melted scar tissue that ravaged the left side of his face, was filled with a terror I'd never seen in him before. Lily, he'd choked out, his voice a raw rasp. Don't leave me. Please. I can't do this without you. And I'd wanted to tell him so many things. That I was sorry for being so cold and distant for the 2 years of our marriage. Sorry for flinching every time he tried to touch me. Sorry for seeing only the monster in the mirror, and never the man who had been so gentle, so patient, so desperate to make me happy. But the words had been a tangled knot in my throat, and all I could do was squeeze his hand back as the world faded to black. But now, I was staring at a ceiling I hadn't seen in years. I lifted a trembling hand. It was smooth, unblemished. The faint scars I'd gotten from a childhood fall were gone. I scrambled out of the bed, my legs weak and unsteady, and stumbled to the vanity mirror. The face that stared back was my own, but younger, softer. The face of a 22-year-old, not the 30-year-old woman I'd just been. The face of a woman who hadn't yet made the biggest mistake of her life. A choked sob escaped my lips. It was real. I was back. I was back at the very beginning, on the day I was supposed to make my decision. On the day I was supposed to set the course for the ruin of my life. From beyond the thin, warped door of the bedroom, I could hear the sharp, clipped tones of my father, Robert Miller, and the honeyed, poisonous voice of my stepmother, Patricia. They were in the main sitting room. The room where Alexander's uncle, Edward Hawthorne, would present the marriage proposal. The proposal I, in my first life, had been forced to accept. It's a done deal, Robert, Patricia was saying, her voice a silken threat. The Millers need this. Your business is on the verge of collapse. Edward Hawthorne is offering a lifeline, a business merger in exchange for the marriage. You can't afford to be sentimental. Lily will do her duty. She's just a girl, Patricia. My father's voice was weak, a pathetic echo of the man who used to be my hero. And Alexander, I've heard things. Terrible things. His face is disfigured, for God's sake. The man is a recluse. He doesn't leave the estate. It wouldn't be a life for her. A disfigured recluse is better than a destitute daughter, Patricia snapped. You think she'll have a better life on the streets? Besides, there are incentives. Rumors of old money, hidden away. The Hawthorne name still carries weight. We need this, or we lose everything. You, me, and your precious daughter. It's her sacrifice for the family. She will do it. The familiar nausea curdled in my stomach. I'd heard this exact conversation before. A lifetime ago. I'd felt so trapped, so betrayed. I'd walked into that sitting room with tears in my eyes. A victim on the altar of my father's financial incompetence and my stepmother's greed. I'd consented, and I'd spent 2 years married to a man I saw as a monster. A man I believed had somehow co-opted my life. But I knew the truth now. I knew that man. I knew the warmth in his hand and the terror in his eye. I knew his touch was always hesitant. Not because he was a monster, but because he was terrified of scaring me. I knew the gardenias in the garden were for me. Because I'd once mentioned I liked their scent. I knew, with a soul-crushing certainty, that I had loved him. And it had taken my death to realize it. Not this time. This time, I wasn't going to be a victim. A fierce, searing emotion, far more potent than the despair of before, ignited in my chest. It was a fire of resolve, of retribution for the happiness I'd squandered. I would find a way out of this. I would refuse. I would not let the Hawthorne name be the noose around my neck. I would not let my family see me as a bargaining chip. I threw open the door and marched down the narrow, creaking hallway. The sitting room, with its faded floral wallpaper and mismatched furniture, was just as I remembered. My father stood by the window, his shoulders slumped, a portrait of defeat. Patricia, impeccably dressed as always, sat on the edge of the couch, her eyes sharp and calculating. And there, standing in the center of the room, was Edward Hawthorne. He was a tall, lean man, with a hawkish nose and dark, shrewd eyes. A stark, polished contrast to the dusty room he was standing in. He wore a bespoke suit, and his smile was a thin, unreadable line. He didn't know. No one in his family knew about me. "Ah, Lily," Patricia trilled, her face a mask of forced cheerfulness. "Come in, dear. Mr. Hawthorne is here with a very important proposition." I ignored her. My gaze was fixed on Edward, a newfound steel in my spine. "Mr. Hawthorne," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "thank you for coming all this way." "The pleasure is mine, Miss Miller," he said, his voice as smooth as his suit. "I understand my proposal is a surprise, but I believe it is a mutually beneficial arrangement. My nephew, Alexander, requires a suitable partner, and I've been informed your family could use the stability our name would provide." I could see Patricia's eyes gleaming with avarice. My father simply looked at his shoes. He wouldn't save me. In this life, I would have to save myself. "That I am flattered," I began, the rehearsed words of refusal forming on my lips. I was going to tell him I had no interest, that I wouldn't be sold off like a piece of property. The thought of the look on Patricia's face was almost enough to make me smile, but then I saw it. A man in the doorway. I hadn't noticed him enter. He was tall, with a lean, broad-shouldered frame that seemed to shrink in on itself, as if trying to disappear. He was dressed in a simple, dark suit, but it was his face that held my attention. My heart stopped. On one side, his features were sharp and handsome, a high cheekbone and a strong jawline. On the other side, a shimmering, twisted mask of scar tissue pulled at his skin, rendering his eye a misshapen slit. It was the face of the man I'd been married to for 2 years. The face of the man I just left in the hospital. It was Alexander. He wasn't supposed to be here. The first time he hadn't come. It was his uncle who handled everything. He'd been so hurt by the world, so ashamed of his appearance, that he'd remained a ghost in his own life. But here he was now looking at me, not with the tentative hope I'd seen 2 years later, but with a look of pure, stark dread. He was waiting for my refusal. He knew what his face did to people. And in that moment, the fire of my righteous anger, the brilliant plan for refusal, sputtered and died. Because I wasn't looking at a stranger who was going to ruin my life. I was looking at Alexander. My Alexander. Patricia saw my hesitation, my distraction, and pounced. "See, Lily, Mr. Hawthorne has traveled all this way. It would be the height of disrespect to refuse him outright. We are a family of good breeding." The old Lily would have felt trapped. The new Lily, the Lily who had died in a hospital room with a broken heart, saw a different path. A path to redemption. A path to say all the things I'd left unsaid. I wasn't supposed to be the reluctant bride. I had been, but I'd wasted it. This was my second chance. My gaze locked with Alexander's single, unmarred eye. I could see the same fear in it. A fear I'd seen on the day he'd proposed. A fear I'd caused by running away from him that very first night. I had promised myself I'd never be afraid of him again. With a deep breath, I deliberately moved my eyes over his face, not flinching or looking away. I smiled, a true, genuine smile, and took a step towards him. I could practically hear Patricia's sharp intake of breath. "Yes," I said, my voice ringing clear and firm. "I accept." The room fell into a stunned silence. My father's head snapped up, his face a canvas of confusion. Patricia's mouth was a perfect, gaping O of shock. Even Edward Hawthorne looked surprised, his carefully neutral expression finally cracking. But the most stunned of all was Alexander. He stood frozen, his scarred face unreadable, as if he hadn't processed my words. He flinched again as I took another step closer. You said yes," he finally rasped, his voice the same gravelly sound I remembered. The one that used to terrify me but now made my heart ache. "Yes," I repeated, the word tasting like freedom this time, not a death sentence. "I said yes." A wild, dangerous hope flickered in his eye before it was quickly extinguished, replaced by a deep, bone-weary suspicion. He looked at his uncle, then at me. He didn't believe me. Why would he? The whole world had taught him to expect a flinch, a look of disgust, a flat-out rejection. A smiling acceptance was beyond his comprehension. "This is excellent." Edward Hawthorne finally recovered, clapping his hands together. "A perfect match. We shall begin the preparations immediately. Robert, we'll need to discuss the contracts in detail." Patricia was already at my side, her arm linked through mine, her smile saccharine as she tried to claim credit for the successful arrangement. Of course. Lily is a sensible girl. She knows her duty. But I wasn't listening to them. I was watching Alexander. He had taken a step back, his posture even more defensive than before. His single, good eye was boring into mine, searching for the trick, the lie, the cruel joke. Why, he whispered, the question just for me. It was the same question he'd asked me years from now, on our wedding night, when I'd shied away from his touch. I never answered him then. But I would answer him now. Because you need a partner, I said softly, my voice meant only for him. And I think you might need me. It was the wrong thing to say. I could see the immediate shuddering in his gaze. He saw it as pity, charity, the cruel kindness of a saint who's trying to make the leper feel human. I don't need your pity, he spat, his voice laced with sudden venom. The rejection stung, but I'd seen it coming. He pushed past me, his shoulder brushing against mine. I felt the energy of him, the familiar scent of his cologne and something else, something floral and faintly medicinal. And a tremor went through me. I turned to watch him stride toward the door, his back stiff with wounded pride. The fragile hope I'd seen in his eye was gone, replaced by a cold, unyielding wall. He was angry. He was suspicious. And he probably hated me now for the charade. He thought I was playing up my life before was a series of closed doors. I was a silent, scared girl pushed into a corner. Now, I was in the middle of a battlefield, and my first attempt at peace had resulted in a hostile retreat. But I had set the wheels in motion. I'd said the words. I was bound to him again by the promise of a future, only this time, I'd accepted it willingly. He just didn't know why. He didn't know he was the reason I was still breathing. My husband-to-be had just declared that he didn't want to see me, that he wanted nothing to do with the deal. And yet, I was more determined than ever. The real battle had just begun. It wasn't against my father, my stepmother, or even the mysterious circumstances of my death. It was to win the trust of the haunted, broken man who had just stormed out of my house. And I would win. I had to, because I'd seen the man he was, and I'd only ever deserved him when it was too late to do anything about it. But I had a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. The Hawthorne Mansion on the outskirts of Savannah was a masterpiece of Gothic Revival architecture, all towering spires and dark, rain-slicked slate roofs. But to me it had always felt like a beautiful, terrifying prison. The first time I'd seen it, fresh-faced and frightened, I'd thought of the castles in the old European fairy tales my mother used to read to me, the ones where beautiful princesses were locked away by beasts. The irony hadn't escaped me then. It escaped me now. 2 weeks had passed since I'd agreed to the marriage, and I was being ferried from the miller's modest home in the city to this sprawling, silent estate. My father had signed the papers without a second glance, his business saved by the infusion of Hawthorne capital. Patricia had smiled and waved goodbye with all the warmth of a snake, her eyes already calculating how to spend the monthly allowance I was promised. I was a transaction finalized and shipped. As the vintage black car crunched up the long winding gravel driveway, my stomach was in knots. It wasn't the foreboding of the unknown that plagued me. It was the torturous recollection of the known. I knew these halls. I knew the cold, echoing silence of the foyer, the way the floor-to-ceiling windows in the library let in the gray Georgia light, and the location of the cozy, forgotten kitchen that the staff seldom used. I knew all of it, and I knew the kind, broken man who haunted its halls. The car stopped and the door was opened by a somber, elderly butler named James. He had the same stoic, impassive face I remembered, the face of a man who had seen too much suffering to be surprised by any of it. "Welcome to Hawthorne House, Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, his voice a low, respectful rumble. He hadn't called me that 2 years ago. He'd waited for me to acknowledge my new name. But this time I was already claiming it. "Thank you, James," I said, offering him a small, genuine smile. He blinked, surprised, as if he hadn't expected a new bride to know his name. I stepped inside. The smell hit me immediately. Not just the faint scent of lemon polish and old paper, but the heavy, sweet fragrance of gardenias, drifting in from the back gardens. My heart clenched. He still had them. A secret, silent tribute to a woman he believed would hate him. I didn't have time to dwell. I heard it. A sharp, metallic clatter from the direction of the study, followed by a low, rumbling curse. The sound was muffled by the heavy oak door, But I knew that voice. Without hesitation, I walked towards the study. The door was slightly ajar and I saw him. Alexander. He was standing in front of a massive mahogany desk, his back to me. He was in a state of undress, his white shirt untucked, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His back was a landscape of taut, corded muscle, marred by a few faint silvery scars. He was holding a small silver-cased pocket watch, his hands trembling as he tried to snap its delicate chain into place. His movements were jerky and frustrated, the fine motor control failing him, just as I knew it would. In his more agitated states, his hands, like the rest of him, betrayed him. The watch clattered to the floor again, and he let out another hoarse curse, slamming his fist onto the desk in a rare show of violence that I pushed the door open fully. "Let me help you with that." He spun around, his face a mask of fury and shock. His scarred visage was even more pronounced in the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows, the twisted tissue a bright, angry pink against his pale skin. "What the hell are you doing here?" he snarled. "I told my uncle not to send for you. I didn't want you here." "You didn't want me," I corrected him softly, stepping into the room and not backing away from his ferocity. "But here I am. And that watch is clearly giving you a hard time." I walked towards him slowly, my movements measured and unthreatening. I stopped a few feet away and extended my hand. "May I?" He stared at my open palm as if it were a venomous snake. "I don't need your charity. Or your help," he ground out, his good eye blazing with a barely contained storm. "Whatever little game you're playing, I won't be a part of it. This is a farce. You think because you said yes to a marriage contract, you can just waltz in here and pretend to be my wife. It's a business arrangement. Nothing more." "It's not a game," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "And I'm not pretending. I just want to fix your watch. Let me help you." Why, the question hung in the air, sharp and dangerous. He was as suspicious of my kindness as he had been 2 weeks ago. In our past life, I had been so afraid of his temper, of his intimidating presence, that I'd retreated. I'd let his anger build this wall between us. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. "Because you're frustrated, and it's a simple problem," I said, my tone light but my eyes holding his. "Let me be useful for something other than just signing my name on a piece of paper." He was silent for a long moment, his chest heaving with anger. But then slowly, reluctantly, he extended his hand, the delicate silver chain dangling from his clenched fist. The gesture was stiff, awkward, and his hand was trembling. I took the watch from him, our fingers brushing. The contact was electric, a spark that made my breath catch and made him recoil as if I'd burned him to. "See, not so difficult," I said softly, ignoring his flinch. I picked up the broken link of the chain from the floor, and, with the nimble fingers I'd learned in a previous life, I deftly reattached it to the clasp. "Good as new." I held it out to him. He took it, his gaze flickering from the watch to my face and back again. "How did you? You don't live with a bunch of useless, rich people for 22 years without learning a thing or two," I said with a self-deprecating laugh, citing my fictional upbringing. Though the truth was I'd learned on my own, in this very house, to mend his things in secret. At the tight, angry line of his jaw loosened fractionally. He tucked the watch into his pocket. "Thank you," he said, the words sounding like they were being dragged from his very soul. "You're welcome," I replied. That his guard was down for a fraction of a second, but then he saw something in my eyes, my fondness perhaps, or my grief, and the walls slammed back into place with a vengeance. "You still haven't told me why you're here," he repeated, his voice cold and flat. "You don't want me. You don't know me. You're a beautiful young woman with the world at your feet. What do you possibly gain from being shackled to a monster?" "You're not a monster, Alexander," I said, the name slipping out with an intimacy that made him flinch. "Don't," he snarled, taking a threatening step towards me. His face was a terrifying mask of fury and vulnerability, a potent cocktail that had once sent me fleeing. Now I stood my ground. "Don't use my name like you know me. You don't know what I am." "I know you don't want me to be afraid of you," I said quietly. "That's why you're shouting. That's why you're trying to push me away." It was the truth I'd only realized years too late. He was trying to protect me from himself. His breath hitched. The anger in his expression flickered, giving way to something else. Something raw and aching. But just as quickly it was gone, replaced by a cold, disdainful mask. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he spat, turning his back on me and walking to the window. He stared out at the rain-swept gardens, his shoulders once again rigid. "Go to your room. Forget you saw me. There's a car waiting to take you back to town." This was a mistake. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice quiet but resolute. I walked towards the door. "I'll be in the library if you need me." He didn't turn around. He didn't say another word. But as I closed the door behind me, I saw his reflection in the window pane. His good hand was pressed against the glass, his body trembling with a silent, despairing tension. He didn't believe me. He didn't trust me. The more I pushed, the more he retreated. The first few weeks were a constant push and pull. I would leave a book I thought he'd like on the armchair in the study, and he would ignore it. I would leave a sandwich from the kitchen outside his door, and he'd let it grow cold until James took it away. He was a ghost who haunted his own house, a ghost I desperately wanted to bring back to life. He would yell, he would be cold, he would use his appearance to try and repulse me. But I saw the cracks. I saw him watching me from the shadows, a look of tortured confusion in his eyes. One night, about a month into my new life, I heard a crash from the music room. A room he never entered because it held a grand piano his mother had played. A room full of painful memories I knew from our time together. I rushed down the hall, my heart in my throat. The door was ajar and I pushed it open. Alexander was inside, his face twisted in a mask of grief. He had knocked over a small, ornate statue of a woman playing a lyre. He was on his knees, cradling a shattered piece of it, blood dripping from a cut on his palm. He didn't even register me. "Alex," I breathed, my voice soft with concern. His head snapped up, his eyes wild, like a wounded animal cornered. "Get out," he roared, his voice cracking. "Why won't you just leave me alone?" I didn't leave. I walked over to him and knelt beside him on the floor, ignoring his shouts and threats. I took his bleeding hand in mine, and pressed a clean handkerchief I had in my pocket to the wound. He was so tense, he was vibrating. But he didn't pull away. He was too shocked. I'd never gotten this close before. I'd always run. "I can't leave you alone," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You're not just a name on a contract to me. You never were." "Don't say that," he whispered, the fight draining out of him. A single tear traced a path down his scarred cheek, catching in the ruined tissue. "Don't say things you don't mean." "I mean every word," I said, and my voice was steady. "In my entire life, I've never meant anything more." I started to rise, to give him space, but he reached out with his other hand, his uninjured one, and grabbed my wrist. His grip was firm, surprising in its strength. His face was close to mine, his breath a warm ghost on my skin. He smelled of whiskey, rain, and gardenias. "Why, Lily," he rasped. "Why are you doing this time?" It wasn't an accusation. It was a broken plea. And for the first time, I told him a truth he could understand. I reached up with my free hand, and gently touched the unscarred side of his face. He flinched, but this time he didn't pull back. He leaned into my touch, his eyes squeezing shut. "Because I already know the man behind the mask," I whispered, the words a promise. "And I'm not afraid." He opened his eye. The hope that I'd seen in his gaze at the proposal, the hope that had been so quickly crushed, was back. It was fragile, trembling, but it was there. He didn't move. He just stared at me, his chest heaving, as if I were a mirage in the desert that would vanish if he blinked. His grip on my wrist tightened and he pulled me closer. I could see the conflict in his mind, the war between the terrified recluse and the desperate, lonely man. I was about to speak again, to reassure him, to do anything to break this spell, when he moved. In a single fluid motion, he closed the distance between us. His lips met mine. It wasn't the tentative, terrified kiss I remembered from our wedding night. It was a kiss of desperation, of hunger, of a man who had been starved of warmth his entire life. It was searing and possessive and tasted faintly of salt. I melted into him, my hands coming up to cup his face, my thumb stroking the rough, scarred skin on his left cheek. He made a sound, a low, broken moan in the back of his throat, and he kissed me harder. It was a kiss of forgiveness, of acceptance, of a desperate, aching love that had been trapped inside him for so long that when he finally pulled back, his good eye was shining. The mask of anger and distrust was gone, replaced by something naked and vulnerable. It was the man I'd died for. I don't understand, he whispered, his forehead resting against mine. But I don't want to question it. I'm so tired of being alone, Lily. I'm so tired. You're not alone anymore, I promised. You never will be again. We sat there on the cold, marble floor, the shattered statue, a forgotten relic at our feet. He held me, his arms wrapped around me like I was a precious, fragile thing, and I could feel the frantic, terrified beat of his heart begin to slow. A fragile peace had settled over him, a tentative trust. I had finally broken through, but just as I felt that spark of hope for our future, the heavy, dark thought I'd been pushing to the back of my mind resurfaced. Why was I given this second chance? Why was I sent back to this moment? Was it just to save my marriage? Or was there another reason? A dark, dangerous part of my mind whispered it. The way he was holding me, the sheer desperation of his kiss, it felt like a goodbye. Why did it feel like a goodbye? The weeks that followed were the most beautiful of my life, in either iteration. The thaw in Alexander's icy demeanor was gradual, but it was absolute. He started coming to dinner. He'd sit at the other end of the massive mahogany table, still wary, still quiet, but he'd be there. He'd watch me as I spoke to James about the household, or as I told him about the book I was reading. He was absorbing me, trying to understand this strange woman who had invaded his life and refused to leave. I saw his own quiet acts of rebellion against his loneliness. The gardenias in the garden were no longer a secret I had to discover. He'd pick a fresh bloom for me every morning and leave it on my vanity table, a taciturn, silent gesture of affection that made my heart sing. He started having his suits tailored again, a sign that he was re-engaging with the world, if only for me. His hands no longer trembled all the time. The calm acceptance of my presence was a balm to his soul. He was starting to believe I wasn't leaving. One afternoon, I was in the library, going through some of the old leather-bound volumes. I loved the smell of the old paper, the feeling of history under my fingers. Alexander walked in, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. He was wearing a simple white shirt and dark pants, his hair slightly ruffled. The scar on his face still dominated his features, but I saw it differently now. It was a part of him, a badge of his survival. "What are you looking for?" he asked, his voice holding a warm curiosity it had never possessed before. "Something to read," I said, smiling. "I've exhausted the fiction section. I thought maybe some of the old accounts of Savannah history. I've heard the Hawthorns have been here since the city was founded." He laughed, a low, rusty sound that was still beautiful to my ears. "Perhaps a bit too long. We have a few skeletons in the closet, I'm sure." He came to stand beside me, his hand brushing against my back. The touch was electric, sending a shiver up my spine. He was so close I could smell his cologne, that familiar spicy scent mixed with the floral whisper of the gardenias. "You know," he said, his voice a low murmur, "I have a more recent history book. One I think you'd find far more interesting than old city records." "Oh," I asked, turning to face him. "And what would that be?" "It's a book about a man," he said, his eyes locking with mine. "A man who was so terrified of the world, he let it destroy his life. And then a miracle happened. A woman showed up, a woman who refused to be scared away, and made him think he could have a life again." My breath hitched. The sincerity in his voice, the naked emotion in his gaze, was almost too much to bear. He wasn't just talking about a book. He was talking about us. "The man you're describing sounds like a fool," I said softly, my hand reaching out to rest on his chest, over his heart. "He should have known that the most terrifying thing in the world isn't a scar, but a wasted life." "I know that now," he whispered, his hand covering mine. "Because of you." He leaned in, his lips hovering close to mine. The kiss was gentle, sweet, and full of promise. It was a world away from the desperate, frantic kiss of the music room. It was a kiss of hope, of a future we were building. He pulled back, a genuine, unburdened smile spreading across his features, lighting up his entire face. It was a smile I'd never seen in my first life, a smile that made the scar fade into insignificance. "I have a surprise for you," he said. "Come with me." He led me out of the library and down a long, windowless hallway I'd never noticed before. It was lined with old, dusty paintings and ended at a heavy steel door. Alexander pulled a key from his pocket, an old-fashioned, ornate key, and unlocked it. The door swung open, revealing a set of winding stone steps descending into the dark. "What is this?" I asked, a flicker of unease in my stomach. "The family vault," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Every old family has one. Don't worry, it's not as morbid as it sounds. I keep my most precious things down here." My unease deepened. He was showing me the vault. In my previous life, I hadn't even known it existed. He really was trusting me. He took my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "Trust me," he said, his gaze on me. His smile still in place that I nodded and followed him down the steps. The air grew cooler, and the faint smell of earth and old stone replaced the scent of lemon polish. We reached the bottom, and he turned on a light switch. A single, bare bulb illuminated a spacious, vaulted room. It wasn't a crypt. It was a study. A comfortable, old armchair sat in the corner. Shelves lined the walls, but they were mostly empty, save for a few boxes. And in the center of the room, on a plain wooden table, sat a single massive leather-bound book. "This is what I wanted to show you," he said, gesturing to the book. "It's the history of the Hawthorne family. The real history." "The real history?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "More interesting than the Savannah archives, you mean?" "Yes," he said, his smile turning sly. "You see, the Hawthornes didn't just build this house with old money. We have a more unique inheritance." He opened the book. It was filled with faded, handwritten entries, figures, charts, and old newspaper clippings. He flipped to a specific page and pointed. A line of text. "Private holdings, overseas accounts, mineral rights, and technological patents acquired in the 1970s. I stared at the numbers next to it. I blinked. I looked at the page again. It wasn't a few million. It wasn't even a few $100 million. The figure was astronomical. It was beyond anything I could comprehend. It was in the tens of billions. What is this?" I stammered, my heart starting to pound a frantic, irregular rhythm. I looked from the book to him, my mind reeling. The rumors, the whispers from my first life, Patricia's greedy speculation, they were all true. They just hadn't gotten the scale right. "It's the Hawthorne fortune, Lily," he said, his voice soft, almost apologetic. "My family has been quietly amassing wealth for centuries. My father doubled it with smart investments. I've tripled it since I was forced to take over." He gave a shrug, a slight, self-deprecating gesture. "It's a burden, really. I don't see the point of most of it, but it's there. I just thought if we were going to be married, you should know what you were getting into. Changes things, I know. It's a lot to take in. I was worried it might." He stopped, his confidence faltering. He saw the shock on my face. He thought I was shocked by the money. He misinterpreted my horrified stillness. "It's not a problem, Lily," he said quickly, his voice becoming placating. "It doesn't have to change anything. It's a lot of responsibility. I have to manage it, and I have to protect it. It's the reason I'm such a recluse." A new, terrifying realization was dawning on me. A chill, cold and sharp, ran down my spine. The accident. The car accident that had killed me in my first life. I'd always thought it was a tragic coincidence, a random act of fate. A truck running a red light on a rainy night. A driver who was never found. But the pieces were clicking together in my mind with horrifying clarity. He was a trillionaire. A recluse. He was vulnerable. And I had been the perfect tool. Patricia's scheming. Her early insistence on the marriage. Her predatory greed. My father's business, which had been on the verge of bankruptcy at that precise moment, ready to accept any lifeline. Was it a lifeline, or was it a setup, a way to put the perfect, disposable pawn in the game? My relationship with the reclusive heir had never been a secret. The bitter, lonely wife. The man who would give her anything to make her happy. The perfect mark. A car accident. Years in the future, after a marriage that had been a cold, loveless affair. A convenient way to eliminate the inconvenient heir. And I would have been the one to provide the motive, the alibi, the grieving widow. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth. Alexander's face immediately filled with concern. He reached out to steady me. "Lily, what's wrong? Are you okay? Don't touch me." I said, my voice sharp and panicked. I pulled away from him, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I need to sit down. He guided me to the old armchair, his brow furrowed with worry. What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. I'd seen the ghost of my own past. A past I was beginning to understand was never an accident. It was a murder. My murder. And the masterminds behind it were probably the same people who had orchestrated my marriage to him in the first place. Alexander, I said, my voice trembling. Who else knows about this, about the vault, about the fortune? He looked confused by the question. James knows. My uncle Edward knows the broad strokes, but not the details. A handful of lawyers and financial advisors. Why, your uncle, I repeated, the name tasting like poison on my tongue. Does he visit often? Does he have access to the house? Edward, Alexander's frown deepened. He comes by occasionally. He handles the public-facing side of the family business, the charitable foundations, the social obligations. Why are you asking about him? Has he ever asked about me, about our marriage, about whether I'm happy? Alexander's expression softened slightly, a touch of warmth returning. He asked if you were adjusting well. I told him you were more than I could have ever hoped for. He reached out again, his fingers brushing against my cheek. What's going on, Lily? You're scaring me. I forced a shaky smile. It's nothing. It's just a lot to take in. All this money. I never expected anything like this. It doesn't matter, he said firmly. It changes nothing between us. You are the only thing that matters to me. The money is just noise. I nodded, but my mind was racing. I needed to think. I needed to plan. If Patricia and her cronies had been behind my death in the first life, they would try again. They had everything to gain. If I died, Alexander would be devastated, perhaps even reckless. A perfect opportunity for a hostile takeover. And with me out of the picture, his grief-stricken, recluse nature would only make him a more vulnerable target, but I had a second chance. I knew the players. I knew the game. And this time, I wasn't going to be the pawn. I looked at Alexander, at the trust and love shining in his good eye. He had no idea of the danger he was in. He had no idea that the woman he loved was a target, and that his own family might be the ones holding the weapon. Alexander, I said, taking his hands in mine. I need you to trust me. Completely. Can you do that? Of course, he said without hesitation. I trust you with my life. The words hit me like a knife. He had trusted me with his life in the first life too. And I had let him down. I had been too blind, too scared, too focused on my own misery to see the danger closing in. Then promise me something, I said, squeezing his hands. Promise me you'll be careful. That you won't trust anyone. Not your uncle, not anyone. There are people who want to hurt you. People who want to take everything from you. And they might use me to get to you. He laughed, the soft, confused sound. Lily, you're being paranoid. Edward has been managing the family's affairs for years. He's loyal. He's family. Family is the most dangerous kind of enemy, I said, the words bitter on my tongue. Please, Alexander. Just promise me. He studied my face for a long moment, his gaze searching. He must have seen the terror in my eyes, the desperate sincerity. Because eventually he nodded slowly. I promise, he said. I'll be careful. But only if you promise to tell me what's really going on. You're hiding something from me. I can see it in your eyes. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to pour out the whole story, the past life, the death, the suspicion. But I knew he would think I was mad. He would think the stress of the new life had broken me. I couldn't risk pushing him away, not now when I needed him close. One day, I said, forcing another shaky smile. I'll tell you everything. I promise. But right now I need you to trust me. He pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly. His heartbeat steady and strong against my ear. I do trust you, he whispered into my hair. I trust you more than I've ever trusted anyone. I clung to him, my eyes burning with unshed tears. I had been given a second chance, and I was not going to squander it. I was going to protect this man. I was going to uncover the truth. And I was going to make sure that the people who had killed me once would never get the chance to do it again. I just had to be smarter this time. I had to be faster. And I had to never, ever let him go. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of deception and vigilance. I played the part of the devoted wife while simultaneously building a fortress of secrets around us. I started taking long walks into town, ostensibly to explore the local shops and cafes, but in reality to observe. I watched the comings and goings at the Hawthorne estate from a distance. I noted which cars lingered too long on the road outside our gates. I memorized the faces of the delivery men, the gardeners, the occasional visitors who were always given a tour by Edward himself. Alexander, bless his trusting heart, noticed my restlessness but attributed it to my youthful energy. He would join me on some of my walks, his hand wrapped around mine, his scarred face tilted toward the sun. In those moments I could almost forget the danger that lurked in the shadows. I could almost believe we were just a normal couple, in love and building a life together. But the truth was never far from my mind. I had begun to piece together the fragments of my past life, the subtle clues I had been too blind to see. Patricia's sudden interest in my welfare after the marriage. The way she would call me, her voice dripping with false concern, asking if I was happy, if Alexander treated me well. The way she would hint that I deserved better, that I was wasting my youth on a man who couldn't even show his face in public. In my first life, I had believed her. I had seen her as the only person who understood my misery. Now I saw her for what she truly was. A poison slowly dripping into my ear, sowing discontent and resentment. She had wanted me to be unhappy. An unhappy wife was a controllable wife. A controllable wife was a useful tool. And then there was Edward. I had started watching him more closely, and the more I watched, the more I saw. He visited the estate with unsettling regularity, always with some excuse. A document to be signed. A charity event to discuss. A business matter that required Alexander's input. He would never stay long, never push too hard, but he was always there, a constant presence in the periphery. I began to notice the way his eyes followed Alexander. Not with affection, but with calculation. He was measuring him, assessing his weaknesses, his vulnerabilities. And he was always watching me. One evening, about 3 months into my second life, Edward arrived unannounced. I was in the kitchen, helping James prepare a simple dinner. Alexander was upstairs resting. He had been suffering from a migraine, a common ailment that seemed to be triggered by stress. "I'll show him in," James said, his expression carefully neutral. "No," I said, wiping my hands on a towel. "I'll handle it." I walked into the sitting room to find Edward standing by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. He was wearing an impeccably tailored suit, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled. He looked like a man who had never known a moment of doubt. "Lily," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "How lovely to see you. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop in. Is Alexander available?" "He's resting," I said, keeping my voice light and pleasant. "He's had a headache all day. Can I help you with something?" Edward's smile flickered just slightly. "Nothing that can't wait. I simply wanted to discuss the upcoming charity gala. It's important for the family's public image, and I thought Alexander might want to make an appearance. He's been so reclusive lately." "He's been busy," I said, my tone still pleasant. "We've been spending a lot of time together. He's been very attentive." The words were calculated, designed to plant a seed. I wanted Edward to know that I was not a neglected wife. I was not a tool to be exploited. I was a force to be reckoned with. Edward's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm glad to hear it. I was worried, you know. When the marriage was arranged, I feared you might be unhappy. Alexander can be difficult. He carries so much pain." "He doesn't carry it alone anymore," I said, my voice softening. "He shares it with me now. We share everything." I saw the flicker of something in Edward's eyes. Calculation. Concern. He was reassessing me. The quiet, docile girl he had married off to his nephew was not so docile after all. She was becoming a problem. "Well," he said, his voice light, "I'm delighted to hear it. A happy marriage is a blessing. I do hope you'll consider attending the gala. It would be a wonderful opportunity for you to meet the family's connections, to establish yourself in Savannah society." "I'll discuss it with Alexander," I said. "We make all decisions together now." Edward's eyes narrowed, but his smile remained fixed. "Of course. That's only right. Well, I won't keep you. Give my best to Alexander. He left, and I watched him go, my heart pounding in my chest. He knew. He knew I was a threat. And I knew he would act. The question was when. That night, I lay in Alexander's arms, staring at the ceiling. He was asleep, his breath a soft, even rhythm against my ear. I traced the lines of his scarred face, the twisted tissue that had once repulsed me and now filled me with a fierce, protective love that I loved him so much it scared me. In my first life, I had wasted our time together, wallowing in my own misery. In this life, I was determined to make every moment count. But I couldn't do that if we were both dead. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't wait for Edward to act. I had to be proactive. I had to expose him before he could execute whatever plan he had set in motion. I started with Patricia. I knew my stepmother would be the weak link. She was greedy, but she was also a coward. If I could get her to talk, to confirm what I already suspected, I would have the leverage I needed. I arranged to meet her at a cafe in the city. The same cafe where we had met in my first life, the day she had convinced me to accept the marriage. I walked in, my heart pounding, and found her waiting at a table by the window. She looked the same as ever, impeccably dressed, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Lily," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "How wonderful to see you. You look so well. Married life must agree with you." "Very much," I said, sitting down across from her. "Alexander is a wonderful husband. I couldn't be happier." Patricia's smile faltered. She had expected me to be miserable. She had counted on it. "I'm so glad to hear it. We were so worried about you. The marriage was such a rush. We feared you might regret it." "I don't regret a single thing," I said, my voice steady. "In fact, I want to thank you. If it hadn't been for your insistence, I never would have met Alexander. He's the best thing that ever happened to me." She blinked, clearly caught off guard. I'm so happy for you, dear." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "But I'm not here to thank you, Patricia. I'm here to warn you." Her eyes widened. "Warn me, what do you mean?" "I know about the plan," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I know about Edward's scheme. I know you helped him." I watched the color drain from her face. For a moment, she was frozen. Then she laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Lily." "Edward? What plan?" "Don't play games with me," I said, my voice hard. "I know you and Edward have been working together. I know the marriage was arranged to get me close to Alexander. I know you plan to use me to control him, to drain his fortune, to push him out of his own company." Patricia's face went white. That's absurd. We were trying to help you. The Millers were in financial trouble. The marriage was a lifeline." "A lifeline for you, you mean?" I said. "A way to get your hands on Hawthorne money. But that wasn't enough, was it? You needed more. You needed him out of the picture. So you had me killed." Patricia flinched. She looked at me as if I had grown a second head. "Killed, Lily? What are you talking about? Who was killed?" I paused. Of course. She didn't know I had lived another life. She didn't know I had died in a hospital room, my husband's hand in mine. But she knew the plan. She knew what was supposed to happen. "I'm talking about the future, Patricia," I said, my voice cold. "I'm talking about what happens next. Edward is going to make a move. He's going to try to take everything. And if he does, I promise you, I will make sure you go down with him." Patricia stared at me, her face a mask of shock. But behind the shock I saw something else. Fear. She was terrified. She knew I was telling the truth. "Edward is a dangerous man, Lily," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "I only helped him because I was scared. He threatened me. He threatened your father. He said if I didn't cooperate, he would ruin us." And now I asked, "Are you still scared of him?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then slowly, hesitantly, she nodded. "I am. But I'm more scared of you." I smiled. It was a small, triumphant smile. "Good. Then you'll help me." I had Patricia's cooperation. She didn't know the full extent of Edward's plan, but she knew enough. She knew about the meetings, the secret accounts, the pressure he had been putting on Alexander. She agreed to wear a wire to her next meeting with him. to record his incriminating words that the meeting was set for 2 weeks later. Edward had requested a private dinner with Patricia, ostensibly to discuss a business venture. I knew it was his way of checking in on her, of ensuring her loyalty. What he didn't know was that I had turned the tables. I had recruited Patricia to my side. On the night of the dinner, I waited in the car outside the restaurant, my heart pounding. Alexander was with me, his hand wrapped around mine. I had told him everything, the whole truth, the past life, the death, the plan. He had listened in stunned silence, his face a mask of disbelief. And then, to my surprise, he had believed me. He had held me in his arms and told me he would stand by me. "No matter what, that I trust you," he said. "I always have." We watched the restaurant entrance, waiting for Patricia to emerge. The dinner dragged on for what felt like hours. Then finally the door opened and Patricia walked out. She was pale, her eyes darting nervously. She walked straight to the car and climbed in. "Did you get it?" I asked as she handed me a small recording device, her hands trembling. "It's all there. Every word. He told me everything. The plan to drain Alexander's accounts, to have him declared incompetent, to take control of the company. He said he would have me killed if I didn't cooperate." Alexander's face hardened. "He admitted it, every word," Patricia said, her voice breaking. "He's a monster. I should have never helped him. I should have known better." I felt a surge of triumph. We had him. We had the proof we needed. The next morning, I called Edward and invited him to the estate. I told him I had decided to host a small dinner party, to introduce myself to Savannah society. He arrived, his demeanor confident and unassuming. He had no idea what was waiting for him, that when he stepped into the sitting room, he found me standing by the fireplace, Alexander at my side. Patricia was there too, her face pale. And next to her was a police detective, his expression grimmed. "What is this?" Edward asked, his voice sharp. "What's going on?" "Your game is over, Edward," I said, my voice calm and steady. "We know everything. The embezzlement, the conspiracy, the plan to take over the Hawthorne fortune." Edward's face went white. He looked at Patricia and she flinched, backing away. "You," he spat. "You betrayed me." "I didn't betray you," Patricia said, her voice trembling. "I was trying to do the right thing. For once in my life." Edward's eyes darted around the room, calculating his options. He saw the detective, saw the cold look in Alexander's eyes, and knew he had been trapped. "You think this is over," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You think you've won. I have connections. I have power. I can still ruin you." But the detective stepped forward, handcuffs in his hands. "Edward Hawthorne, you are under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy, and attempted fraud." Edward's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, but before he could reach me, Alexander was there. He stepped between us, his body a shield. His good eye blazed with a fierce, protective anger. "Get away from her," he growled. "You will never touch her again." Edward stumbled back, defeated. The detective grabbed him, snapping the handcuffs into place. They led him out of the room, and I watched him go. The weight of a lifetime of fear and grief finally lifting from my shoulders, that I sank into Alexander's arms, tears streaming down my face. "It's over," I whispered. "It's finally over." He held me tightly, his voice a low, soothing murmur. "It's over. You saved me, Lily. You saved us." I looked up at him, at the face that had once terrified me, the face I now loved more than anything in the world. "No," I said, my voice soft. "We saved each other." The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and public revelations. Edward's crimes were exposed in the press, his reputation destroyed. Alexander was cleared of any wrongdoing, his position in the company secured. Patricia testified against Edward, her cooperation earning her a lighter sentence. It was the least I could do for a woman who had been, for all her faults, a victim too. And then, when it was all over, there was peace. I stayed in the Hawthorne mansion, but it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a home. I tended to the garden, the gardenias blooming in abundance. Alexander worked from home, no longer hiding from the world. Sometimes he would join me in the garden, and we would sit together, his hand in mine, watching the sunset over the Savannah skyline. I had been given a second chance at life. A second chance to love the man I had failed in my first life. And I was determined to make every second count. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Alexander turned to me. His scarred face was bathed in golden light, the twisted tissue no longer a mark of horror, but a symbol of survival, of strength. "I love you, Lily," he said, his voice soft and steady. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn you." "You already have," I said, reaching up to touch his cheek. "You already have." He leaned in and kissed me, soft and sweet, a kiss of gratitude and hope, a kiss of a new beginning. And as I closed my eyes, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had been given a second chance, and I had used it wisely. I had saved the man I loved. I had uncovered the truth. And I had found my happily ever after. At last.